Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I am delighted to have Damian McKinney. Damian is the CEO of DioniLife, which is a really exciting business, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and natural entrepreneur, but also he was Lieutenant Colonel in the Royal Marines and has had a fascinating life, and particularly skills in helping other leaders to grow, other CEOs, when he set up and ran McKinney Rogers, a whole variety of different things he's done. Learned a lot, got the battle scars, and that's why he's a great, inspiring leader for this podcast. Damian, welcome.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good to be here. Yeah, lots of scars.
I think I've got more than you. We'll compare who's made the biggest mistake. What's that over one? I've learned so much from my mistakes. I think I'm going to go make a few more. No, but I don't want to make the same ones. They'll be different mistakes. Even this week I made a few and had to eat some humble porridge or whatever they call it. Now, let's talk about this fascinating new business that you've set up. What was the idea behind it? How's it going? And I just want to say, I've got a few of the cans. I've got a lovely one, which is the Hazy Pale Ale, which is lovely, Mash Gang. I've also enjoyed very much this one. Is it Chive? No? What's it called? This one. Chive, that was good. And I think my favorite, the Lesser Evil, Stout, the Mash Gang Stout, all non-alcoholic, which as someone who doesn't drink anymore, given up for the last 2 years, apart from one time when my whole blood pressure and heart rate variance crashed when I tried a few glasses of Prosecco with my wife. Really like it. Congratulations. Well done. I mean, you're 7 months in and you've got a really good product there. Loved it. Tell us about it and, the business.
Jonathan, yeah, thank you for that. And thanks for the introduction. And yeah, they're great beers. Look, I think I was introduced. I'm going to say something now, and people may react right at the beginning of this interview, but I was given my first beer at 13 by a headmaster in Kenya who invited me in to congratulate me for being captain of the first 11 and said, "You're old enough to have a beer." Now, I'm sure there's many here going, "That's awful, that's abuse," and so forth. Actually, the key point is education and learning. And often we talk about in the beverage industry, talk about responsible drinking. What happened was that this was a moment of you're going to have a beer to celebrate, but understand it is a beer. And then at home, I was allowed with the family to have one every Sunday, no spirits, always done transparently. So I sort of grew up understanding that. It wasn't until I came to England where I witnessed binge drinking and I witnessed, frankly, people getting paralytically drunk and throwing up everywhere. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. And why would you ever want to be that sick and behave in that particular way? So that's always been in sort of back of my mind. Secondly, on the other hand, there's always been this fun element of having a drink. And certainly as a Royal Marine and subsequently, the idea of sitting down and even younger witnessing my parents and others, there is something wonderful about a lunch or a party where people are having drinks, there is music, they're all sitting around enjoying themselves, they're laughing, they're enjoying life. And when I put those two pieces together, and then even during my military career, we'd go off on operations. And very different to the US, when we came back in, often we would go, and I'd like whiskey, so I'd go and buy whiskey, a bottle of whiskey, somebody would buy some beers, and we would clean our weapons, and we would debrief, and we would talk, and we would talk, and we would talk and talk. And if you think about PTSD, and unfortunately I've had my fair share, like many others, but a big part of this is your ability to talk it out. And having a drink, and the reason I'm saying that against that is because when we talk about mental health issues, and therefore we talk about life in general today, what is really, really important and what was tragic during COVID and the lockdown was we stopped people coming together and socializing and talking. And therefore you can see why there's more mental health. Now, it sort of builds up the sort of experience bank for me, which was then I got very involved in Diageo, which I think is an amazing company, and spent many years with them and they're involved. They built some of the great brands and great liquids and so forth. But behind it all was this sense of drinking responsibly. And then I ended up running Stoli again, and I was really excited. And again, it was all about creating amazing experiences. But in the back of my mind always was the flip side of this was shots, which means drinking a lot of neat alcohol very, very fast with really one outcome. There are those who unfortunately have an addictive personality who become addicted. And one of the things I used to say to my team and others is, have you ever gone and sat in an Alcoholics Anonymous or Drugs Anonymous meeting? And what I found is virtually none of them had.
I have.
Which is shocking.
Yeah.
But when you go there, and it was my son who actually was the one who said, Dad, come with me, we're going to go and watch this. What struck me was, of course, the individual you're listening to, and you could see how they've destroyed their lives in so many respects. And at the core of all this was that this self-esteem had gone. But it wasn't that really got me. It was the destruction to their loved ones and their best friends and the communities. And I was really shocked. And I've done more since. And indeed, I went and lived on the streets for a few days because, again, a lot of that exposes you to. And the reason I'm saying all that, which is that sort of built up to a head of steam, which is at the beginning of sort of middle of 23, where I'd left Stoli, and like everything, most business people, you should be able to establish a successful commercial enterprise. And we delivered great results, and it was all going really well. But for me, there was something missing in all this. And in a way, I've got this sort of Patagonia piece about this, which is, I felt like I was doing half the job. I wasn't doing the full job. And also at the heart of all this is well-being and fitness. I wear a Fitbit, and I know you wear a Whoop, having listened to you earlier on. And I like keeping fit. And I first got a Fitbit, and it was not about the fitness. It was actually about sleep, because I was programmed never to have more than 5 hours sleep. But you need more sleep. And so I got it so I could look at dashboards. I like data. I like at dashboards, and I check it every day. I'm a competitive individual, and I kind of forced myself to take more sleep. But in the process, what I realized was if I had more than 2 drinks of an evening, my resting heart rate shot up on average 10 beats. That's 10 beats a minute. So whether you like it or not, whether anybody else says, oh, it doesn't matter, the fact is your heart's working harder. So I take all those into account, and I just suddenly thought, do you know what? I'd love to get into something like non-alc. And I had a great lunch in London with Mark Meek, who's at IWSR. We were talking about next chapters, and I'd been offered a couple of big roles, one in the industry and one outside the industry, and I just kept saying, but I really want to get this one right. And he said, and he's somebody who hasn't drunk for a couple of years. He said, have you looked at all the data on non-alc? And I said, not really. And he said, look, let me just tell you. He said, first of all, 54% of 21 to 30-year-olds in the US have not drunk a drop of alcohol in 6 months.
Wow.
54%. 80% of people who drink alcohol are moderating. And then when you add to that the fact that the health organizations, WHO and everybody else, including, by the way, the Surgeon General in the US now is saying the guidance is that this is not healthy. So with the old days of saying 2 glasses of wine are good for you, the fact is it's not healthy. Not everything is healthy. Getting in your car, there's always a chance, but there's a risk factor. So he just started laying all this down. And out of that, he and I just said, wouldn't it be great to create a non-alc company, pure play, so there's no alcohol in there, but based on the bests of alcohol, but none of the negatives. And that's where I got really excited. And out of that was born this idea of creating DioniLife, which we launched on the 1st of September, was actually 31st of August last year. And the simple premise is create a portfolio of brands, start with a beer, which you introduced at the beginning, bring in some spirits and some ready-to drinks, but all of them deliver the same experience. Now, this is slightly anti what other people would say, particularly who've never drunk alcohol in your life. But those people who like a beer want to drink a beer. They don't want to, and this was the really important thing, is that remember when Caliber first came out, and indeed O'Doul's in the US, people said, look, at the end of the day, you're the designated driver. or you're the recovering alcoholic, or you're the boring guy in the corner. You said you want a beer. It tastes really bad, but at least it's a beer. Get on with it. That's the honest. So you started on a no, you continued on a compromise, and that's really what it is. Now, what happened since? What's happened since? Thank God, people like Guinness Zero, like you say, to Athletic, there's a bunch of brands now, Heineken Zero, who've all done a really good job at producing actually a better tasting beer. So they've recognized that taste is important, but they've really focused on the kind of health functional area. And I get it, because it's my Fitbit point earlier on. But what DioniLife is all about, and that's why I like DioniLife, because Dionysus. Dionysus is a nod to the Greek god of wine, a Greek god who was fun. He was a rebel. He was if you think of the pantheon of the gods, he was Zeus's problem child in a way. Right? He was a bit of a rogue, but he was a fun rogue. And if you add the word life on it, it's actually really important. It's about quality of life. It's about fun. It's about enjoyment. And that's why I want to connect all these pieces, which is, I think what's missing is so we could all say, I'm just going to do something that tastes great and is going to be good for my life. And therefore, what we really want to do is put ourselves in cotton wool and actually make sure that hopefully nothing goes wrong. And that's what I call the medical tent. Or we can say, I'm going to give you something that tastes absolutely bloody amazing. I'm going to give you the chance as well to be in the party tent, and it's inclusive of everybody. If you want to drink, you can have a drink. That's your point. You understand the risk factor. But I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to talk. I'm going to live life. And by the way, I'm going to get in my car, drive home safely. I'm going to have a fantastic night's sleep. And I'm going to get up tomorrow, go to the gym, go for a walk or otherwise. And I'm just giving myself a chance to have a better life. And that's what DioniLife is hopefully all about.
Well, I think you've nailed it very strongly. And that's why I really respect and want to be aligned with what you're doing, because firstly, you come from a place of what good leadership is about and the way you run your business. And secondly, you want to connect with your customers to make it not just, as my friend who carries on drinking, but teases me, says, Jonathan, you won't live longer. It just feels like you're living longer. I go, actually, no, not anymore. So when Lee and I go out to the local pub, which is a lovely pub, I have a zero alcoholic beer or a Guinness, and she has a nice glass of red wine. We have a lovely time together. And then we've made some other friends. Fun enough, one who was Richard, who was the ex-commanding officer of 7 RHA, so he's airborne. And he and his wife, and we get chatting, and we meet some other locals. And it's just a lovely evening before we then come home, have a candlelit dinner and a date night. And now we're doing it more often. So going to the pub and being able to drink non-alcoholic but fun, exciting drinks, I think you're onto something. So well done on that. Now let's go on to talk.
Oh, Jonathan, can I just, I'm sorry I interrupt you, but I'll just
come on.
Next piece. And again, I'm going to be unpopular for saying this, but I think it's important. You know the hero to zero?
Yeah.
I know why people put zero on the bottles, particularly in the big brands, because they have to. But that still is a compromise. Mm-hmm. You're still putting a label on people's heads. And part of the issue, I think, in the past has been, if you walk into a bar and the bar person says, what would you like? And you say, I want a non-alc, it goes silence. I went to Barbados at Easter, and one of the red caps, the baggage people I've known, he's called Muscles. I said to him, I'm really excited. I'm doing non-alc now. And he looked at me and said, why? Right. So a big part of all of this is we have to remove the labels of stigma. And the reason why I love this, I can ask for a mash gang. You can ask for a Guinness. There is no difference at the end of the day. We can stand shoulder to shoulder and have a drink with no stigma, no compromise, enjoy the experience. But I know what I'm drinking is also healthy.
Yeah.
That's really got to be a good thing going forward. Sorry to...
No. I'm pleased you did, because I think with all the guests that I'm having now, so many of them are interested in longevity and that their biological age matches their chronological age, or they can beat it. And I'm very excited showing you the new Whoop medical grade, where I'm proud to say that my biological age is 7.3 years younger than my
Very impressive.
chronological age, because of all the
Yeah.
aspects of the health that I'm now doing, including not drinking for the last a couple of years, bar one. And that'll be my way now. Now, this is all part of inspiring leadership. Health, well-being is one of the 8 components that we talk about a lot. But you've had the good fortune of being with some of the most inspiring leaders that people will meet. A lot in the Royal Marines, and you talked about Gwyn Jenkins has now become the first Sea Lord. Obviously Al Cairns and other people like that you've met and known. And Rob Metcalf, thanks Rob, who introduced you and said, this is an inspiring leader you need to have on the podcast. So great to have you. Recommendations are the ones that come. I don't really need agencies. I just all the inspiring leaders recommend other inspiring leaders. And then you've got something rather than there's an angle because they're trying to sell somebody to you and you don't know what they're like. It's like someone telling you it's a really good wine and you've never tasted it in your life. And you don't know the person who's recommending it to you. So you're not quite sure whether you can trust them. So you know other inspiring leaders. We're going to talk about a couple who will be your guests. But you've also, even though now I'm sort of anti-alcohol, not anti-alcohol, but just it's not for me. I'll respect others who did. And I had, in my first marriage, one of the relations in the family, sadly, was alcoholic. And as a family, we all went to Al-Anon to try and help that person. It didn't help and it killed them. And so I feel strongly about how badly it can go wrong. And through Al-Anon, I understand about the sort of Stoic philosophy and the choices we make and how it not only wrecks that person's life, but alcohol then wrecks everybody around them. It just has this contamination. So putting that one to sleep, you worked in Diageo, and time and again, I meet leaders who either worked as part of the leadership development team there, or they were trained by them or worked in it. And they just said Diageo's leadership was exceptional. They practiced what they preached. And so many organizations need a little bit of that early learning leadership. So long way of saying, you've met lots of interesting people. Who are the couple that you're going to call out? One was, I think, Bill. Tell us about Bill.
Yeah, no, actually, it's funny. I just added another name to this as you were talking. Look, I've met a lot of exceptional leaders in the military and in the business. Often, what makes them stand out? I feel like I've got a list of them. It's not just their leadership, but it's the way they sort of mentored me, and gave me space and opportunities. So let me call a couple of them out. Actually, one is military, and the other one is business. The first one is Alan Hooper. Mm-hmm. Now, I'd had Robin Ross. So Alan Hooper ended up a brigadier, but was CEO of 40 Commando, and Robin Ross, who ended up obviously as Commandant General. Let me call Alan Hooper out in particular. Alan Hooper, I was OC Recce, and it was back in 1985. We were in Belize at the time. I was involved with my team on a number of operations, and I was 25 years old. And I came back with this idea of how we would sort of clear, without going into the operational confidentiality of the situation, but how we would clear a particular area. And like any young, enthusiastic individual, you sit down in your patrol report and say, by the way, here's how I would fix it. And I read a few lines. And then frankly didn't think anything of it. It was November, I sent it up. And then 2 months later, he sent for me and I got on a helicopter. I flew up, met him, and he said, do you remember that patrol report you put forward? And I said, yes. And he said, well, that idea went all the way back to 10 Downing Street. Wow. And the Prime Minister has sanctioned the operation. And the only question she asked of me and the general, and by the way, this was a general in a different chain of command. I didn't even know this general was. The only it was, are you old enough and senior enough to run the operation?
Wow.
Because I said I need a bunch of extra assets and things. And I looked at him and said, now I'm 25, he's 42. great colonel, really going places, and a superb leader in as far as I was concerned. And I looked at him and said, "What did you say, sir?" And he said, "You're absolutely the right person for the role." And the general said the same. And then he turned to me and said, "So here's the deal. Whatever you need, let me know, and we'll set you up for success.
Wow.
But if you screw this up, you screw my career up and the general's career." And that was the first moment when I realized, really, really realized, the leadership responsibility isn't just down, it isn't just sideways, but a really big part of it. If you want to be trusted, you've got to earn the trust, and therefore your responsibility. That was a really big lesson.
Yes.
But he took a massive risk on me, massive. And subsequently, it went pretty well, and I ended up meeting the Queen, and it was great. But I would never have achieved those. I would never have achieved those had that one man not taken a risk on me and given me the chance to do that. Now that's superb leadership. And then the other one is Bill Simon, who was working in Diageo, running an in-market company, and then subsequently ended up as the CEO of Walmart US. He was previously in the US Navy as a pilot flying off decks, which I always respect, frankly, and was an immigrant family, but was born in Texas, a superb individual. He's one of those very cool, calm leaders, very, very visionary, very clear. I mean, don't forget, in Walmart at the time, we're delivering $1 billion of sales a day.
Wow.
Be a bad day if you got that wrong. And over 1.1 million employees. I mean, this was, and one of the things I remember him saying to me one night is they had this term, which is sunset rule. And the sunset rule is if you get an email or a note from somewhere, you have to respond, even if it's a holding response, you have to respond by sunset every day. 1.1 million employees, and he stuck to that rule, and always responded, always very clear. And for me, he was an extraordinary leader. And again, I as far as I'm concerned, I ended up doing a lot of work with him, and I grew massively with him. So I think what pulls him is this mentoring, support, trust, etc.
Fantastic couple of examples, and exactly what is my own experience of what makes great leaders. And a lot of people listening, you are the wonderful example of what I look for as some of the guests, that you've had an interesting mix of life. Yes, you've been fortunate you had the Royal Marine upbringing, but then you spent a lot of time in business. And it's that combo. It's great to get some guys who are still serving in Navy SEALs and things like that, but nearly all of them have gone on to do other things. And it's that combination of the very best of military leadership, where they invest thousands upon thousands in your development. Whereas if you're not in Diageo and others, they think spending £5,000 on you during your career is a lot of money. Should we spend that much on their development? As someone once said, if you think education is expensive, try the cost of ignorance. And time and again, they don't. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, look, I here's the common theme, which is, I think, it's how you're trained. Mm-hmm. We trained all the time, in inverted commas, to go to war. Mm-hmm. You train for operations. Now, the reason I'm saying that is the same parallel should be, I train to go to business. I train to do business in a great way. The difference, I think, however, is we do more case study theory work in business training development, and I'm sure people are going to object to that, versus doing it for real. So now, and I've sort of said, so when I came back from the first Gulf War, and we've been involved in the refugee crisis, provide comfort afterwards, I'd been injured a couple of times, so I had to go off and had a couple of operations, and I ended up in the officers' training wing at Lympstone. And I remember somebody very proudly taking me into the systems training room and saying, we've now developed the systems approach to training, and look at all the agendas. And it looked beautiful. All looked wonderful. And I looked at it all, and I just turned to him and said, but at what point do we train people to go to war? And what had happened is the bias had started to move away from, we're actually here to prepare people psychologically as well as functionally to go to war, versus I'm putting you through a training program, which hopefully will equip you. And how will I know it equips you? Because I can tick all the boxes. Now, what's the subtlety to that? When I looked at the exercises, which is the scenario playing that you were going through, what I found was they were literally just checking the script versus, and basically we ended up rewriting a lot of the exercises. Actually, I went back to a lot of the exercises that I'd gone through, which was put a scenario together, which is the sort of scenario that, so if you're training people to deliver, to survive an ambush, make it a real ambush. Now, you've obviously got safety associated with that. But if you make it too sanitized and too theoretical, then at the end of the day, there are two issues, and these are really important in business as well. Number one is the learning is not as deep, because we know that the best learning is experience. It's your ability to play back that experience where you really learned, right? But there's a second piece, which is called deja vu. Because of what I'd been through when I went through training, I went straight to Northern Ireland. Wow. As a young 19-year-old, straight into bandit country, and it was 1980. So it was, reasonably rough time. Honestly, there was nothing I faced that I hadn't already faced before. Now, there's always variations on the theme, but we'd faced it because they made it really real. And I think when it comes to business, so when I look at my teams and I look at what I'm looking for is scars. I'm looking for, have you got the experience, but have you also been developed through a series of experiences that actually have prepared you, one, to be able to do it, and two, the deja vu.
Yeah, great story. And the experience plus, as Navy SEALs say, when something goes wrong, now what? What have you learned? What are you going to do? Learning action. And time and again, to try and take leaders away from crucifying someone when something goes wrong in a small way. And I go, has anybody died? They go, no. Well, why are you just berating this person and beating them up? Is this a teachable moment? What have they learned? What are they going to do differently? Give them a chance. And so often I get really concerned about this. They go, oh, well, I'm in charge of this bit, and I've got someone who's in charge of America. I'm a global head. Someone in charge of the Middle East. Someone in charge of Asia. And the bosses have encouraged me to sort of fire them all. And I go, why? Oh, well, they weren't quite right. So it's going to take you 18 months to 3 years to get the next person up to speed. Do they realize how long it takes to develop people? Are they not going to develop them, or are they just going to be like private equity, fire the CEO, fire the CFO, bring a new one in, and then we'll 10x our money? And I think they use people like resources rather than as humans. Talking about humans have life stories, and you've got an incredible background story, which has made you the leader you are today, with all the swashbuckling attitude to leadership that you have and learning from it. As someone said, how are you going to die? And I say, when I die, I want to be not just gently bumbling across the final line and collapsing in a heap. I want to screech across it with a smell of burning rubber going, hell, what a ride. That's it. You're going to be like that, I'm sure, Damian. So you had a fascinating life. Kenya, Mr. Chitty, I remember you and your brother hitchhiking age 4 and 5, what an amazing life. Just give us a little thumbnail in about 5 minutes of how it shaped you and the leadership values you have, and that ability in being out there in the wild, taking some risks, making mistakes, learning from them, being a bit edgy, but yet still learning.
Swashbuckling, I'm still chuckling over. So
you are.
I think that's a nice description. Look, I think I'm one of the world's luckiest people. I grew up in a great country called Kenya. Grew up on a coffee farm in Limuru, just outside Nairobi, and I grew up speaking Swahili as my first language until I was 10. And in the sort of African culture, and I feel very African. I'm third generation, but stories are really important, and often you'd listen to stories, and a big part of the stories was also about, this is how you should live, and here's some life lessons. And there were two words I remember consistently being used. One of those was respect, and the other one was explore. And the word respect was respect Mzee. Mzees are the old people. They're the ones who typically tell the story. They're the ones who hand down from generation to generation. But they're also the ones who are the sort of, they also lay down the code, the rules, particularly Mama. This is what you do. But in a sense, what they did also was would say, so for instance, if you go out into the bush, and we would often go into the bush, be careful, lions will bite. Snakes can be poisonous. So in a sense, they were saying, look, there's some boundaries. So just as long as you know the boundaries, and two of the boundaries is never break the law and never hurt somebody. I mean, there were two really, really simple rules, but just understand those rules. Now, if you understand those rules, then live life. And live life was all about exploration. Tomorrow morning, the sun will come out. It's going to be an amazing day. And at the end of the day, when you see the sun set, if it wasn't particularly good, don't worry. Tomorrow is going to be another amazing day, and you can. It was always this, and that's why somebody accused me of being half gallon full, because I think I'm a beneficiary of this. There's so much, and it's so interesting, so exciting. Now, the reason I say that is then, as I'm growing up, not really, I suppose, not terribly surprising. That story of there I am as a 5-year-old and my brother's 4, and we're curious, and I think curiosity. You're constantly looking. Why does something happen? And I remember looking, and there was this guy there who's hippies. It was the 60s. And there's a guy there with his thumb out, and his car stops, and he gets in, and off he goes. And I turned to somebody and said, what do they do? And he said, it was this Wazungu thing. You put your thumb out, it's called hitchhiking, and the car stops, it's free ride. And I looked at my brother. Anyway, one of the things we used to try and do was we had these old comics and Commando mags. So no wonder I became a Royal Marine. And what you could do is there was a second-hand shop about 3 miles away, and you go down, and we used to have to get a lift from somebody and go down, my mother or whatever. And we suddenly went, cracked it. So the next day we had a little briefcase with our comic mags in, and I hitchhiked. And as we were standing there, this car stops, and it's an old vicar. And he looks at the two of us and said, aren't you two a bit young to be hitchhiking? No, perfectly all right. He said, well, does your mother know? Of course she does. No idea. Of course she does. He said, okay. So we got in his car. I mean, completely alien to anything, to be honest, you should do, particularly now. And we went down. We exchanged our comics. We hitchhiked back. Never told her mother. And thought, that was great. There's another experience for it. Now, the reason, so it's things like that have shaped us. And my brother often refers to us now as both feral, but he went off and great career in the police and so forth. But the reason why I say that's important in a way for me is not only shaped me, but when you get older, you're asked to go back and get involved in graduation speeches and so forth. And often my theme is encourage people, in inverted commas, to be naughty. And I get quite a lot of people sucking their teeth because the reason I say that is I go back to please don't break the law, please don't hurt anybody, be safe, but encourage people therefore to take some risks and explore, because in business or in the military, being entrepreneurs, we're constantly saying you've got to take risks, you've got to have a go. But what do we tell our children when they're young? Most of the time, we use one word: no. I was standing in a queue waiting to check in for a flight, and there were a family in front of me, and two kids, young kids, were playing around, and one was just behind me, not very far away. And the mother shouted at the child and said, "Come back here, somebody may steal you." We're just encouraging everybody to be risk-averse. Now, I have a slightly different approach, and again, this is maybe back to a swashbuckling. My son, when he was 5, climbed out onto a roof, which was a one-story roof outside. And my mother, who's pretty brave about all these things, but maybe it's an age thing, said, get him in quickly. I said, hold on a minute. So what I did is I climbed out onto the roof with him, and I said, I'm going to show you how to do this safely. I'm going to show you 3 points of contact. And I went through all the safety and I said, you're going to climb out here anyway. So I would rather teach you how to do it safely and encourage you to take risk rather than cuss at you, put you inside, stop you, and you never experience, frankly, the fun of climbing on a roof in the fresh air. But at least I'm doing it safely. So that for me was all about confidence, all about encouragement, all about, come on, get out there and enjoy. Which is why, frankly, when it came to the joining the Royal Marine Commandos, I just thought, why not? It's an adventure. I love the idea of adventure. I love the idea of being tested. I love the idea of being, in an organization that's an elite force and so forth. Why not?
No, fantastic. And what a collection of different experiences you've had. We learn a lot from some of our dark moments. Everybody has them. I've got a collection of them. But if you were to pick one or two dark moments in your personal life or your career, and what it taught you, Damian, which ones would you share with us?
By nature, dark things you don't share, do you?
Exactly.
Look, I'll share two of those, really. One is a simple one, and it's not that dark, really, but it was a massive learning. When we were doing the Commando course, inevitably the pressure gets on and you're into the final tests and so forth. And I had the first exercise and I was going to lead it one of, I think it's 4 exercises, and therefore you must be doing pretty well. And I was just, I don't know what it was. I was cocky. I thought I didn't really plan. I didn't really prepare. I stood up. I saw the disappointment in my company and my course officer's eyes when I presented the plan. I went out on the beach. We had to do a classic sort of radar attack, and it didn't go very well. And I remember my course officer taking his berry out, his coveted green berry, and throwing it on the floor.
Oh, really?
And it was interesting. He'll teach you a moment. I could see it in his eyes, and I could see it in the senior NCOs. They were not angry with me. They were just incredibly disappointed because I think they thought that actually I could do better.
Yeah.
And that was a moment for me where actually they didn't shout. It was just that disappointment. Should I tell you what? I never forgot that moment. 9 months later, I had to actually do a real attack for real. And it was incredibly successful simply because I'd learned the lesson the hard way and people had given me the space to learn it. And I really learned it. So for me, that's.
Hold that thought, because it really triggered for me another story, which I haven't forgotten equally. Sort of similar stage when we were officer cadets at Sandhurst. In those days, I think we did almost 2 years. And at the end of our 7-month program, there was a final exercise. And they chose a small group out of the 13-year platoon, 5 of you who are going to be in the cadet government. So 3 cadet corporals, a cadet sergeant, and a junior under officer. And they were about to choose them. And I was given the chance. We were in a defensive position, and they wanted one cadet to be the company second in command and to, take on this appointment. So I got this. Clearly, they were pointing me out possibly for a junior under officer or something exciting. And I didn't know what to do. I'd never seen a company second. I'd never visit a command post. And I remember feeling absolutely lost. I just sort of wandered around a bit. The directing staff were in the tent. They were talking about the exercise, that kind of stuff. And I just was incredibly average and uninspiring. I didn't know what to do because I had not seen things. And surprise, surprise, I didn't become the junior under officer. It became a good friend of mine now, Greville Bibby, and we're still 43 years later in touch. And Richard Eden became the sergeant, and then Rod Thomas and I and one other who just gone out of my mind for a moment, we became the cadet corporals. So I became a cadet corporal. It was a big moment. But this moment to when they really thought I could do something, I blew it. Which is ever since I've thought about this, that people need to go and experience something and see what best practice is, see what it's like to be in a brigade headquarters, or see what it's like to run something. And often in business, the CEOs that you have trained in the past and I work with now, they're suddenly promoted. Congratulations. We've now we've chosen you as the CEO. Off you go. Like no training course, no development, no go and here's a network of other CEOs, chat to them about their experiences and what they've done. They don't do any of that. And then they go, I'm really disappointed with that CEO. He never really came good. Well, what did you do? Did you give him any experience? So it's really stuck with me that we have to see what good looks like. And often we don't get shown it.
Do you know what? Can I just the military do this really, really well, which is a couple of things. Number one, I was never reported on in terms of my annual appraisal on my ability to do my current job. It was my ability to do my boss's job, my boss's job. Now, of course, they're looking at the role you're doing at the moment, but it was the ability and the potential to do those others. Right? Whereas I find in business, that's never the reporting. It's always done in current or below. And therefore, and all the coaching is in current and below. And then all of a sudden, when they suddenly say, to your point, you promotion. Now, why do the military do that? Well, part of it is because therefore you need to know what your boss is thinking and your boss's boss is thinking. And it's called strategic intent and so forth. Why? Because in the middle of the battle, if your boss falls over, you cannot suddenly say to the enemy, can we have a pause whilst I put in place my 100-day plan to actually get into to then take it off? You don't. You have to execute the battle plan there and then. Now, how do they do that? Is the training, therefore, is all designed to do exactly what you did, which was, if you're a corporal, then you would be expected not just to do the sergeant's job, but the officer's, the troop commander's job. And everybody's done that. And all the training courses I ever did, you were always doing multiple roles. And obviously, they're testing you to see who has the potential to do all of those roles, and particularly at staff college.
You are so right. And in business, I go, who is your second in command? What do you mean? I said, look, if you're away for 2 weeks holiday, who takes over from you and goes to all the key meetings? Oh, well, no one else does. I stay in touch while I'm away on holiday. So you don't switch off? Yeah. I mean, I spend the morning doing my emails and being on some calls, and then I join the family in the afternoon. Okay, there's a whole story behind that. But I go, so you're not training up a bench strength of people to take over from you? Well, don't want to be threatened, really. So I say, so you've got a whole load of dwarfs working for you, metaphorically, people who are smaller than you, rather than an army of giants you don't need to be around. You can step back up on the balcony rather than the dance floor. And they get the balcony dance floor thing that too many of these businesses, they're spending their time on the dance floor, in the operational fine detail. Retail is detail. They're always proud of that. But they're not thinking, where are we going to be going in 6 months, 12 months, a year, 2 years? What are the three strategic decisions we have to make this month? They're going, well, I reckon there's not enough currants on that bun. There should be, a couple more. And they get caught into doing people's jobs 3 levels down rather than giving clear direction.
100%. And can I just sort of build on those 2 points? I want to make 2 points. Just on that one. Imagine if everybody did step up a level. Now imagine, to your point, what you could do. You don't have to worry about today's. So but certainly in DioniLife, everything I'm trying to do is, and I don't have a head of HR. I am HR, because ultimately, it's about people, and therefore culture is not about a handbook. It's about how we behave and how we operate as a group of leaders, and it's not easy, and we've got to work through those things. But at the end of the day, role modeling is about people admire the way you operate and they copy it. So trying to get so I encourage often the sort of second point is sustainability. People in a race cannot sprint all the time. And then people say to me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I say, no, hang on a minute, be really clear. I want to be the Kenyan actually crossing the line in record time. But the way you do that, and again, it goes back to speed marching, which is you run down the hills, you run along the flats, and you walk fast up. So you pace yourself in the right way. Critical in business, therefore, are these vacation or holiday moments. In the military, they were really important. You pull people off the line. By the way, your best people, your most enthusiastic, your most passionate, never want to be taken off the line because they're committed. The problem is they'll fall over. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you as a leader have to say to them, I'm taking you off the line. But when you take them off the line, you've really got to make sure they stand out. Now, how do you do that? Part of it is because they're great people. They care. and they have a conscience, and they worry that whilst they're off the line, they're going to be letting you down or letting their team down or whatever, which is why you have to encourage them to have somebody who'll stand in. So if I'm having a weekly operating committee, I will say, and I actually say, if you're going to take some time, who is standing in for you? You've actually physically got to write it in. And then when they come to the meeting, I will expect them to make the decisions, not say, I need to report back. So it's a great development moment for them. It's a great, they have confidence, but they need to come ready and know what's going on. It means you've briefed them and they're really up to speed on what's going on.
So true.
It truly means that when you're away and you come back, the system is still going. People have got more confidence working. Now, of course, if the odd, unfortunately, hand grenade goes off, then they may need to give you a ring, but it should be by exception.
Yes.
But it's because of one final point is, I think sometimes in business, and I've seen this quite a lot, which is I expect you to know everything all the time. And I expect you to know everything your direct reports and everybody else knows. No, that's their job. And be careful that you're not actually asking. I actually, the other way around, I want them to know what I'm doing so that they understand the context and the why they're doing what they're doing. And therefore they'll perform even better and give you a better result of all that. And they're developing and they're growing and we can have some time off and we can manage and we can deal with it. We can, be successful. So they're all interconnected, these pieces.
This is fascinating. And Damian, it's good we've got about 10 minutes left. I am going to get you back later this year because we've got a part 2 to do. I don't often do this with many leaders, but you've got such a wealth of fascinating, relevant experience to the CEO guests who are listening around the world that we'll have you back. And also it'd be nice to hear how you're getting on with DioniLife and how Mash Gang and the other offerings are. So in about 6 months' time, we'll get part 2. But while we finish off part 1, what was the second dark moment that you were going to share? I know you don't want to do that one, but what's the second?
I'll try and avoid that. Look, and I'm sure we've all had a few dark moments. The one that probably stands out was a moment where I had some PTSD, which, by the way, is not an excuse. But it was also a time when personally in my family, and frankly, at the end of the day, a bit like that drugs, the drug situation, I blew my family up.
Yeah.
And it was a very personal decision. It was the wrong decision to make in the way I made it. Now, by the way, I am very, very, very happily remarried. I've got the most amazing kids, but I also had amazing kids then, and they continue to be amazing kids. But the way in which I did it was wrong.
Yeah.
Completely wrong. And I think what it did at the time is, and it was kind of high stress, it triggered. I'd never had PTSD in my life. I was 4 years out of the military. I didn't even really know what it is. And I started crying. I hadn't cried since I was 8 years old. And suddenly you start, this stuff is just, it's weird what goes on in your head. But it was a dark moment because, and here's the really important, you talked about Rob earlier on. I turned to Rob about 4 years later, and we were walking around the Sydney Opera House, and he was in my batch. He was he was 23. I was this kind of young 18-year-old at the time, and he was always wise, wonderful individual. And I said to Rob, because we were talking about this, and I said, why didn't you tell me I was being a complete idiot? And he said, because you abandoned us. And I was shocked. I said, what do you mean I abandoned us? He said, you didn't reach out. You didn't talk to anybody. We were all there. We were all watching. Indeed, we did reach out. And by the way, I did reach out on that particular occasion, but you just ignored me. We were there, but you decided to do it all on your own and hunker down. And in a way, that's what you do. You become a survivor, and what you do is you hunker down and you say, I can't bother anybody else. I've got to fight my way through this. I don't really understand whether it's the PTSD or the destruction and the stuff I'm doing. You just think you can. The answer is you're wrong. And I think in moments like that, you have to reach out to your best friends. You have to be honest. You have to say, and family, say, this is what, so now I'm the other way. Now I constantly talk about communication, and it's, we talk about feelings. People go, well, it's touchy-feely. No, if something's really not right, or you're not feeling good about something, then we'll talk about it, because actually talking about it, you can deal with it.
Yeah.
and you can get it out. And by the way, your friends really are there for you, and other people really are there for you. So out of that dark moment, as always, comes a moment of light. Yeah. And I feel blessed today that I'm in such an amazing position with, by the way, having blown the family up, good place with my ex-wife, my kids. We're very, very close. We live very close to each other. We spend a lot of time together, and a beautiful new, lovely wife called Chrissy, and I've got the kids. I mean, it's all worked out brilliantly in the end.
Well, I really relate to that. I also blew up my first marriage, and I take full responsibility. And it was very painful for everybody. But now, luckily, Lee and I are remarried. We've been married now over 10 years, and good relationship with all 4 children, and a good relationship with my ex-wife. But it took some work, and it took me to do some work myself. Actually, I went on a few very valuable retreats. One was the Hoffman process, which is brilliant, looking back at my childhood and why I was behaving the way I was. And then also 11-day Vipassana Buddhist retreat, which was silent, which was fascinating. And then another one called the Mankind Project, which with a bunch of other men and what they've all been through, and very interesting. But I think, I don't know about you, but I know that I put on a lot of masks. I particularly going away to boarding school aged 8. And as I stood there, the housemaster said to me as my mother drove away, leaving me with a complete strange man, "Stop crying. We don't cry here." And so I didn't, ever again, didn't cry. And then, of course, you go and join the army, and it's all about stiff upper lip. And I served with the Scots Guards as a platoon commander for a couple of years, which suddenly I was the young lad from Halifax, was with the upper class, what they call themselves, Surrey Highlanders, in the Scots Guards, but good friends of mine now. But I was trying to be something else. And I remember catching up with friends of mine from Yorkshire, and they said, "I'm so glad you're back and you're not such a dickhead as you were when you were trying to be something you weren't." And I said, yeah. But we sort of put these masks on because we think that's what's required. It takes us to have the humility to make some mess ups, to learn out that's not the way to be. Before we go on to your top tip at the very end, in this part 1, because we've got a whole load more things to discuss in part 2 in about 6 months' time. What would bit of advice if you went back to meet the Damian McKinney, age 16? Okay, what bit of advice would you give to the young you? This matters, but this is not important at all. What advice would you give?
And this is different to my final question.
Your final one. Yeah, just different to your final bit of advice.
Look, in a way, I'm not sure. So the advice I would give, which is actually, and I give it all the time now, do what you really love doing. Don't be swayed by people saying, you've got to do maths or engineering because it's the proper thing to do. Don't go into a particular job because it's the done thing to do. Just do what you really love doing, what you're really good at doing, and just go and do it because you're going to love it. And then secondly, treat life as an opportunity to really have a series of experience and enjoy it. And it is an adventure. So in Swahili, the word safari means adventure. And when you go on an adventure, you will get a puncture. The vehicle will get stuck. Things will go wrong. The exhaust will fall off. All the things that have happened to me. But what happens is you then fix them. Then you laugh about them, and you go, "Wow, that was great fun." And when you're sitting there over the fire later on, it's an adventure. So I suppose I would. Those are probably, and I could give you a whole more list. But just live life.
Yeah.
Live life.
Yeah, we're a long time dead. And I've got this amazing chart, Memento Mori. Have you ever come across that? Remember, we're immortal. I'm going to share it with you.
Yeah.
And those on the screen. So here it is, and 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman, and that's my 4,000 weeks. Well, I haven't got many left, but I'm going to make the most of every one, and however many more Christmases I've got, I'm going to. Having lost my brother David, who died of metastatic cancer 3 years ago, and from diagnosis to death, just 10 weeks, I've gone like, I'm alive today. Today's great. And a bit like you with your attitude, your positive attitude to life. I go, I am so lucky that whatever happens, hey, ain't that bad. He didn't get to do the things he hoped he could do. He's not alive anymore. I happen to be, so don't mess it up, make the most of it, and be very grateful for what you already have.
I agree, John. Let me add one thing. And when you asked me about my darkest moment earlier, let me connect the two. I always feel like I've got a little boy inside me.
What are you going to do when you grow up?
That little kid just loves playing,
Yeah,
loves having fun, loves adventures, loves laughing and giggling. And so that's the little boy. When I went through my darkest moment, I remember thinking about the little boy, and I realized the little boy was dying.
Mm. Wow.
That, I think, was the thing that shocked me. You always talk about your lowest moment. That was the moment when I thought, hang on a minute. This is not me. It's not me. I'm doing things that are wrong. I shouldn't be doing them. And as a result of which I'm causing myself this cost. But this little boy inside me is shriveling up. Or I suppose, don't let the little boy die. Mm. Don't let other people tell you you're not a little boy anymore. Mm. Don't tell them you're grown up. Don't let them tell you you're old. Don't tell them that you've got to sit down and you've got to be pedestrian and all that. Don't let them do that. Because that little boy hasn't changed. Mm. Still, or little girl, still want to have a lot of fun and enjoy themselves. So let them do it and keep feeding them. That, honestly, is important.
And I can tell it comes straight from the heart, and it comes straight to mine. Right. And I really relate to that, because I can think of my little boy on a hillside in Scotland, and just learnt that my dad was dead. Been killed flying in the Navy, and that Mum had 3 boys and she was 33, all under the age of 10. And just like, what do you mean we don't have a dad? I just couldn't compute, and so. Don't forget that little boy. I think it's very powerful. And I won't forget that comment that you've just made. Thank you. Which takes us to the lovely moment where if you'd kind enough to introduce yourself, a bit about your sort of past history, but what you're doing now in 2 minutes, and your top leadership tip. Over to you.
Jonathan, thanks for that. Sharing your own story as well. So look, I'm Damian McKinney. I'm part of the DioniLife team. It's a pure play, non-alc company, but all designed to give you amazing experiences, drinking a beer that's non-alc, a spirit that's non-alc, but in the comfort and enjoyment and fun and vibrancy of other people. So hopefully a fun company. That's what we're trying to do. Now, what's my tip? As we touched on through the podcast, I've got a lot of scars, and I use that word a lot. I do, internally and externally, and some I regret, some I think were okay, and I learned from. But here's the one that stood the test of time, and I've got this right on some critical moments, and I've got this wrong. And essentially, it is that what is wrong at the beginning? So you make a decision, and you know in your head the decision you're making is wrong. It will continue to be wrong, is wrong, and will not change being wrong. And therefore, your job is to make it right, not later, but now. Because if you don't, it'll continue to be wrong. And actually, that stayed with me throughout. And it's because so often, we sit in a world, ethically or otherwise at the moment, where we're encouraged often to do, we're being told this is the right decision. This is what the leaders are saying. They'll justify it. They'll give you data to justify it and so forth. But if you know it's wrong, it's wrong. And sorry, can I finish with a little story? And it's a daft story, but it's an important one. I was in Iraq. We were doing the refugees. I've never been involved with refugees in my life. We're setting up a medical compound, and my guys who've not trained, these are people who are warriors, go to war. They're not trained to put up tents in a medical compound, and they spent 3 days putting up medical tents. And then my sergeant majors came to me and said, "Look, boss, could you come and have a look?" So we're walking down this line, and as we were walking, he knew me so well. He started realizing that I wasn't saying much. But what I realized, and this is going to sound, as I said, really, the tents were a foot out. A foot out. The line wasn't 100% regimental straight. And therefore, in my head, I was going, this is crazy. They're not trained to do this. They've spent 3 days doing all this. What is afoot? It doesn't really matter, etc. And I had 200 refugees living with me at the time. We got to the end. He said, you're not going to do this, are you, boss? And I said, yes, take them all down and redo them. They have to be absolutely straight. And why? Because in my head, I was thinking about history and those higgledy-piggledy towns that were built up, which could never really grow until somebody had a massive fire, and then they rebuilt them to great scale. And I knew somehow that if I ended up with a lot more refugees, this had to be laid out right. So we got to the end, and I said, it's wrong. I'm really sorry. I know this is hard. I know you're there, but you've got to redo it. And we did. We rebuilt it in a day. We ended up with 50,000 refugees 3 weeks later. And imagine if I hadn't. But it was one of those moments where you just knew what the right decision was, but the danger is you put it off for all the good reasons, not good reasons. I hope that helps.
It does help a lot. Damian McKinney, thank you very much indeed for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. You must return. Thank you very much, and good luck as CEO of DioniLife.
Jonathan, thank you, and appreciate the moment.